HOA sold my ranch before sunrise. So I sold their entire neighborhood before lunch. The morning I came home and found strangers hauling off my equipment, I knew something was rotten. My 3,500-acre family ranch, gone on paper, stolen by an HOA I never joined. But they didn't know the truth. I had the law, the land, and a federal easement on my side. And before this story ends, I'll show you how I turned their scam into the biggest legal reversal this county's ever seen. If you're new here, hit subscribe. These fights get real, and I'd like you riding with me on the next one. The sun was just lifting over the Wyoming horizon when my tires crunched onto the old ranch road. The kind of sound that usually meant home. Cold dawn air poured through the cracked window of my pickup, carrying the familiar mix of sagebrush, dust, and the faint mineral scent drifting off Cottonwood Creek. After a long night hauling supplies from town, all I wanted was a hot cup of coffee and the steady rhythm of cattle waking across the 3,500 acres my family had run for 3 generations. But halfway down the drive, something felt wrong. Too many unfamiliar shapes moved in the pale light, figures hoisting tools, men in shiny vests shouting instructions, trucks I'd never seen before lined up like a construction site. One of them had my grandfather's old feed wagon hitched to it, wheels kicking up dirt as they dragged it toward the gate. Another man was trying to load the branding chute, cursing when it caught on a panel of fencing he clearly didn't understand. I eased the truck to a stop, heart thudding slow and heavy. These weren't neighbors helping themselves. These were strangers dismantling my life. A sheet of paper snapped against the wooden gate in the morning wind, slapping the sun-bleached boards like a warning. I stepped out of the truck and walked toward it, boots sinking into the frost-soft ground. The page was stamped in bright red, official enough to make a man pause. Foreclosure. Sold to HOA bidder. Effective immediately. For a second, everything inside me went still, the way the land does right before a storm breaks. My breath felt too loud in the cold air. This ranch, my ranch, had never been under any mortgage, lien, or dispute. I'd paid every tax bill early, kept every receipt filed in the metal cabinet my father welded himself. There was no possible universe where my land was up for foreclosure. A woman's voice cut through the stillness. "Mr. Carter, we've been expecting you." I turned to see her, tall, polished, wrapped in a bright red wool coat that didn't belong within 50 miles of cattle country. Marilyn Croft, president of the Cedar Hills Homeowners Association, a development 5 miles south that sprouted beige-roofed houses like weeds around a golf course none of them knew how to maintain. She carried a clipboard as if it were a sheriff's badge, her blonde hair pinned so tight it looked painful. Behind her, 2 HOA board members hovered with tablets, documenting every piece of equipment the strangers were hauling off. "Expecting me?" I said, voice low. "Mind telling me why people are stealing equipment off my land?" She offered a smile so thin it barely counted. "Not stealing. Transferring ownership. The property was auctioned yesterday afternoon. Procedures were followed." "Procedures?" My hand tightened on the paper. I never missed a tax payment in my life. What auction? Marilyn's eyes gleamed in that way people get when they enjoy delivering bad news. Foreclosure auction. Delinquent community impact fees totaling $78,000. The HOA placed a lien on the property months ago. You received notice. "I'm not part of any HOA," I shot back. "Never signed a thing. Never agreed to a thing." "Oh, but you are now." She tapped her clipboard with a manicured nail. "Boundary adjustments were filed last year. Cedar Hills extended jurisdiction over adjacent properties. That includes your ranch. Membership is automatic." I stared at her, the morning wind whistling between us. "Lady, my grandfather bought this ranch in 1954. You don't get to auto-enroll land into your little covenant." She shrugged, as if this were a trivial misunderstanding rather than grand theft. "Community standards exist for stability. And when owners fall behind on required fees, consequences follow. The winning bidder has already initiated transition. I looked at the men dismantling my loading chute. One of them waved, clueless. "Where you want this, boss?" Marilyn didn't even bother correcting him. "You're trespassing now," she said quietly. "Best gather personal items and leave before law enforcement arrives to remove you." My pulse pounded in my ears. The sunrise painted the ridge behind her in warm gold, but none of that warmth reached me. "You think you can take 3,500 acres with a piece of paper and a fake fee?" She smiled again, wider this time, victorious. "It's already done." But there was something wrong in her confidence. Something rehearsed. Too clean. Too fast. My father always said you can hear truth in a person's voice, and hers sounded like polished aluminum, shiny but hollow. I held up the notice so the wind rattled it. "How do you sell land that never belonged to you?" Marilyn didn't answer. She just turned, signaling her men to continue. Behind her, the ranch I'd spent my life protecting looked suddenly fragile, like someone had knocked loose a fence post and the whole line was leaning. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a declaration of war, and they picked the wrong Carter to start it with. By the time I reached the Cedar Hills Community Center, the morning frost had melted into thin ribbons of mud along the roadside. The air smelled of pine sap and damp earth, that sharp Wyoming scent that usually cleared my head. Not today. Not with my ranch being carved up by people who'd never set foot on a real pasture. My boots thudded across the wooden steps harder than I intended, the echo carrying through the quiet hallway like a warning. Inside, the owners' meeting was already underway. Rows of folding chairs faced a projector showing a colorful map, my ranch outlined in bright HOA blue as if someone had scribbled territory lines with a playground marker. A half-dozen board members sat at a long table, their polished smiles stiffening the moment they noticed me. Marilyn Croft stood at the podium, red coat draped neatly over the back of her chair, like a flag she expected everyone to salute. She lifted her chin. "Mr. Carter, you weren't on today's agenda. This meeting is for verified Cedar Hills property owners only." I walked down the aisle, ignoring the murmurs from residents who'd shown up to watch their HOA flex its power. "Good," I said, "because I'm here to find out how you think my ranch ended up on that map." A man in a plaid golf vest adjusted his glasses. "Boundary realignment," he said. "Filed last fall, perfectly legal." "Filed where?" I demanded. "County offices," Marilyn replied smoothly. "The proper channels. We mailed notices to all affected properties." My jaw tightened. "To which address?" One of the board members flipped through a folder. "P.O. Box 227. "That box expired in 2009, I said. "You mailed notices to a dead address." Marilyn's smile didn't move, but something in her eyes flickered. "We are not responsible for your failure to maintain correct contact information." My hands curled at my sides. "You manufactured fees. You mailed them to an empty box. And you foreclosed on my land without a single in-person notice?" "That's how the system works," she replied coolly. "Cedar Hills enforces standards. When owners refuse to comply—" "I never joined your HOA," I cut in. "Never signed a covenant. Never agreed to anything. You joined automatically when your parcel became part of our jurisdiction. Through a boundary realignment I never saw." "It was public record," she said, tapping her clipboard. "You could have objected." I stared at her, feeling the same slow heat that rises in a man when a bull turns on him in a pen. Steady, dangerous, impossible to ignore. "Show me the document." The board members exchanged glances. Finally, the man in the golf vest handed over a copy of the so-called boundary map. The paper smelled of toner and cheap laminate. I scanned it, flipping to the signature block at the bottom. Surveyed by Richard H. Klein. Date: 4/12 of last year. My stomach dropped. I knew Richard Klein. He'd surveyed half the valley back in the 1980s and 90s. He also died 10 months before this signature was dated. "This signature is forged," I said quietly, raising the page. "Klein passed away last March." The room stiffened. Someone whispered. Even Marilyn's facade cracked for a breath before she smoothed it back into place. "You must be mistaken. Our legal team prepared the documents." "Your legal team had a dead man approve your boundary change?" Her voice sharpened. "Unless you have verifiable proof that Mr. Klein is deceased, that accusation is inappropriate." I stepped closer, holding her gaze. "His funeral was at St. Paul's. I was there, and even if your paperwork wasn't forged, which it is, you don't get to swallow 3,500 acres because you need a buffer for your pickleball courts." A few people laughed nervously. Marilyn slammed her gavel. "Order! Mr. Carter, you are disrupting this meeting. If you continue, we will have you removed." "Try it," I said, not raising my voice but letting the weight of the words settle. The back door opened. Sheriff Bo Hargreaves stepped inside, hat in hand, badge catching the fluorescent lights. He looked between me and Marilyn with the weary expression of a man who'd rather be anywhere else. "Morning, Elias. Got a call about a disturbance." "There's no disturbance," Marilyn said smoothly. "Just an individual refusing to accept the lawful foreclosure of his property." Bo rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Elias, the paperwork's processed. Everything's stamped and recorded. Not much I can do." I turned to him. "Sheriff, the document they used to take my ranch was signed by a dead man." He glanced at the page, squinting. "Well, that's something the county clerk will need to look into." "After my land is gone?" He didn't answer, which was answer enough. I took a slow breath, letting the tension coil inside me instead of spilling out. "Fine. I'll leave your meeting alone. But hear this, Marilyn. If one signature is fake, what else is forged?" Her eyes narrowed, and for the first time, I saw fear slip through the cracks of her confidence. I turned and walked out, the stale scent of carpet cleaner giving way to the sharp, cold air the moment I pushed open the door. The wind cut across the parking lot, carrying dust and pine needles that scraped against the truck's hood like whispers. I slid behind the wheel, gripping the steering wheel until the leather creaked. Fake signature. Dead surveyor. Boundary nobody approved. The pieces felt small now, scattered and strange. But deep down, I knew one thing. Forged paper was never about a typo. Forged paper meant someone wanted something enough to lie for it. As I pulled onto the road, the map in my lap flapping in the wind, a chill ran up my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. If they could fake one document, they could fake a dozen. And if they'd forged their way onto my land, what else were they willing to do to keep it? The ranch wasn't just under attack. It was part of a plan. A big one. And I'd just seen the first crack in their armor. The snowmelt had softened the northern pasture enough that my boots sank a little deeper with every step. A thin layer of dusk settled over the horizon as I walked the fence line, the sky shifting from gold to a tired purple. Cottonwood Creek whispered nearby, water pushing softly over stone, the sound usually enough to settle my mind. But not tonight, not with the uneasy silence hanging over the land like a warning. I'd spent the afternoon going over every folder in my office, comparing the bogus HOA boundary map to my original survey documents. Every time I traced the lines, the same thought gnawed at me. Forged signatures didn't just happen. Someone wanted the ranch badly enough to risk prison. That narrowed the suspects down to one group, the same one that had just tried to hand me an eviction notice. But even knowing that didn't prepare me for what I found next. A strange stillness clung to the air as I followed the trail of hoof prints heading out from the pasture. My cattle should have been settled for the evening, gathered near the south slope like they'd done for generations. But instead, The tracks wandered in a confused pattern toward the property line, a sign of spooked animals, not a calm herd. I reached the old cedar fence just as the wind picked up, rattling the barbed wire like something alive. That's when I saw it. 3 sections of fence had been sliced apart. Not ripped, not broken by animals. No, this was precise. Clean cuts through the wire, straight through the posts. The edges glinted under the last stretch of fading sunlight, sharp and even, the work of bolt cutters. A fresh anger surged through my chest. Cutting a fence is more than vandalism out here. It's sabotage. It's an attempt to cause chaos, push cattle across boundaries, and create evidence where none exists. Exactly the kind of scenario an HOA would twist into a complaint. Dangerous livestock on suburban lots. Rancher unable to control his herd. Immediate threat to property values. And someone had done it under cover of dusk. I crouched beside a post, running my fingers over the smooth cut. Professional job, I muttered. Whoever had done this knew exactly what they wanted. My herd on HOA land. I glanced north, the direction of the Cedar Hills subdivision. Even from a distance you could see porch lights glowing. Houses lined up in identical rows like someone punched out a template and pasted it on the edge of the prairie. A few silhouettes hovered near the easement road, phone screens glowing blue, pointed toward my property. Recording. Setting a narrative before I even had a chance to see the damage myself. The crunch of gravel behind me made me stand up straight. A boy, skinny, maybe 16, wearing a hoodie too thin for the cold, stood with his hands shoved deep in his pockets, rocking on his heels as if trying to disappear into himself. His hair flopped into his eyes, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Mr. Carter?" he said, voice cracking. "Evening," I replied, keeping my tone calm. "You out here alone?" He swallowed hard. I needed to talk to you." The shift in his voice made my stomach drop. "You know something about this?" I asked, gesturing to the cut fence. He nodded, eyes wet. I didn't want to do it." The wind carried his words away almost as quickly as he spoke them, but I heard every syllable. "What happened, son?" I asked, softer this time. He looked down at his shoes. "Ms. Croft, Marilyn, she said the HOA needed proof your cattle were a problem. She said it was community service. She gave me $50 and told me to cut the fencing at dusk. Said no one would know." Anger pulsed through me again, colder now, sharper, but not at him. "What's your name?" I asked quietly. "Wyatt," he whispered. "Wyatt Bloom." I nodded. "Wyatt, thank you for telling me. You did the right thing coming here." He squeezed his eyes shut. "I thought it was just a scare thing. Like they'd send a letter or something. I didn't know that they'd try to take your whole ranch." I drew a breath, steady and slow. "Listen to me. You're not in trouble with me, but I'm going to need you to tell the truth if someone asks." Wyatt hesitated, kicking at the dirt. "They'll kill me in that HOA. Not literally, I mean, like, my mom will freak out. We rent. Marilyn's the reason we got the place cheap." His fear sat heavy in the cooling air, heavier than the shadows now gathering across the land. I straightened. "How about this? I won't involve you unless absolutely necessary, but I may need your word later. And if you're ever pressured again, you call me. Understand?" He nodded, wiping his sleeve across his nose. "I'm real sorry, Mr. Carter." "I know, son." A distant honk echoed from the HOA side. Someone's car alarm or a signal. Wyatt flinched. "You should head home," I said. "Stay out of sight for tonight." He hurried off along the property line, shrinking into the growing darkness until he vanished behind a mesquite stand. The stillness returned, but not the kind that calms a man. This one crawled under the skin. I turned back to the fence, The broken wire glinted under the rising moon, each cut shimmering like an accusation. Wyatt's confession wasn't just proof of sabotage. It was evidence that Marilyn was orchestrating an entire campaign to bury me under violations. Fence cutting, fake signatures, bogus boundaries. Each piece pointed to a deliberate, coordinated effort. They weren't just trying to steal land. They were building a case. I pulled out my phone and took photos of the damage, close-ups of the cuts, and wide shots showing the trail of cattle tracks leading from my ranch into HOA land. Evidence. Cold, undeniable evidence. Above me, the prairie wind shifted, blowing from the direction of Cedar Hills. I imagined Marilyn standing just beyond the ridge, smiling with that same tight little smirk she wore in the meeting hall, believing she'd driven me into a corner. But she didn't know the truth about corners. Some men get trapped. Other men gather force. "Let's see what you break next," I murmured into the wind, the words swallowed by the night. Because for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw the shape of their plan, and I also saw the shape of my counterattack forming right beside it. The next morning started wrong before the sun even cleared the ridgeline. A cold front pushed across the plains, dragging a low gray sky with it, the kind that flattened the horizon into one long shadow. My coffee hadn't even finished brewing when a white HOA vehicle pulled up the drive, one of those compact SUVs with magnetic decals on the door, the kind meant to look official without having any real authority behind it. A man in a powder blue windbreaker stepped out, clutching a clipboard to his chest like it was armor. His breath puffed in the icy air as he approached the porch. "Mr. Carter?" he called. I stepped outside, mug in hand, letting the screen door snap behind me. "Depends who's asking." "I'm Jeremy from Cedar Hills Enforcement Division." He said it proudly, as if Enforcement Division meant anything more than a made-up title designed to intimidate retirees about their lawn decor. "I'm here to deliver formal notice of expedited eviction." "Expedited what?" I asked. He held out a manila envelope thick with papers, the edges crisp like they'd just rolled out of a printer that morning. "Due to unpaid community impact fees and failure to comply with multiple violation orders, the Cedar Hills Homeowners Association has moved to immediate removal of the occupant. You have 10 days to vacate HOA property." HOA property. I let that phrase sit in the cold morning air until the weight of it settled into my bones. "Son," I said quietly, "this ranch has been Carter land since before your subdivision had a name, since before half your residents were born." Jeremy glanced at his clipboard. "The records we have show—" "The records you have are forged," I said, not raising my voice, "signed by a dead surveyor and used to justify a fraudulent foreclosure." He swallowed, the Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. "Sir, I'm just doing my job. And I'm just protecting what's mine." His shoes scuffed nervously across the porch boards. "If you don't vacate voluntarily, further action will be taken." I set my coffee down, stepped closer, and drew the envelope from his hand. "You tell Marilyn that further action is exactly what she's going to get." He retreated so quickly you'd think the wind pushed him. By the time the SUV rolled away, dust swirling from its tires, my pulse had settled into a slow, dangerous rhythm. The kind of rhythm you feel before a storm breaks. Not fear, not even anger, but clarity. Inside the envelope lay a stack of papers thick enough to choke a horse. Violation notices, turf management fines, water access assessments, a printed map showing my ranch labeled as Phase 2 of Cedar Hills Resort Expansion. And at the top, a date circled in red, 10 days from now. But on the final page, tucked almost as an afterthought, was the name that tied everything together. Clint Barrow, developer, consultant, beneficiary. Barrow's name triggered a memory, an old newspaper article about a failed development outside Casper, one that promised mountain luxury living before collapsing under lawsuits and allegations of misused funds. Clint had slithered through that mess like a snake through tall grass, shifting blame and walking away with a smile that never reached his eyes. And if Barrow was involved here, that meant the HOA wasn't just harassing a rancher. They were trying to clear prime land for a luxury golf resort with lake access. My lake access. The plan was bigger than I realized. The wind shifted, carrying the faint smell of wet cottonwood. A storm was coming. I headed to the old barn, the one built by my grandfather's hands, beams still sturdy beneath decades of Wyoming winters. Dust motes floated in the slanted morning light as I climbed the loft ladder and reached for a wooden box tucked behind a stack of horse blankets. The lid creaked open, releasing the bittersweet scent of old paper. Inside were the documents my father had insisted we keep safe. Deeds, survey maps, water rights certificates, and somewhere beneath them, the oldest one of all. I flipped through yellowed pages until I found it. A folded map stamped by the U.S. Department of the Interior, dated 1968. The ink was faded, but the words were clear enough to stop my breath. Riparian easement, Cottonwood Creek Tributary Protected Waterway, Federal Jurisdiction. Landowner, Charles H. Carter. An easement like this wasn't just a water claim. It was federal protection. It meant any land touching the creek, any land using it, diverting it, impacting it, fell under special jurisdiction. HOAs couldn't override it. Developers couldn't bulldoze it. County officials couldn't redraw it. This wasn't a weapon. It was a shield. But only if I could prove it still stood on record. The barn door slammed suddenly as the wind picked up. For a moment I imagined Marilyn standing there, bright coat glowing like an omen, her voice dripping with false authority. "Paperwork is power," her developer friend Clint had said. He wasn't wrong. He just didn't understand that I had paperwork too, older, stronger, legal in a way their forged maps could never touch. I slipped the easement map into a protective sleeve and locked the barn behind me. The cold bit harder now, the sky darkening as the storm line crawled closer, the wind whipping dry grass against the fence posts like rattling bones. Standing there on the packed dirt path, map tucked under my arm, I felt something shift inside me. The helplessness from the day before was gone, replaced by something steadier, something razor sharp. They wanted to erase me, to turn my life's work into a resort brochure, to bulldoze my history for profit. But the land remembered its owners, and I remembered how to fight. As the first drops of icy rain began to fall, pinging softly against the metal roof of the barn, I looked back toward the creek that had fed this ranch for generations. "An easement can override any HOA," I murmured, "if I can prove it." The storm behind me rumbled an answer. Tomorrow, the real battle would begin. When dawn finally broke, it did so reluctantly. A low fog clung to the pastures, the kind that settles in your lungs and makes the whole world feel like it's holding its breath. The storm had passed, but it left behind a heavy silence. No bird song, no cattle calling, just the quiet hiss of wet earth drying under a pale Wyoming sun. I loaded the old thermos into my truck and slid the riparian easement map into a leather portfolio. The paper felt fragile, worn from decades in my father's loft. But the ink still carried authority, federal authority. I drove toward Cheyenne, the road winding past limestone cliffs and long stretches of prairie that glowed gold beneath the morning light. I'd made this drive hundreds of times, but today my hands gripped the wheel harder, knuckles whitening each time I replayed Marilyn's smug smile. Boundaries, forged signatures, sabotage. Every piece pointed to a machine built to steamroll anyone who stood in its way. But machines break, especially when someone knows where the weak bolts are. By the time I reached the city, the fog had lifted, revealing the boxy silhouette of the Monroe and Tate Law Office near downtown. A hand-painted wooden sign hung near the entrance. It always surprised me that Rachel hadn't swapped it for something sleeker. But then again, she was one of the few attorneys who understood that some things, like truth and timber, didn't need gloss. Inside, the warmth hit me instantly. Coffee, printer ink, and the faint citrus scent she always kept in her office. Rachel stood behind a cluttered desk, sleeves rolled up, copper hair pulled into a loose knot. At 30-something, she had the kind of focus that could silence a room without raising her voice. "Elias?" She nodded once, scanning my face. "You look like you haven't slept." "Didn't," I admitted. "Got something you need to see." I laid the easement map on her desk. She reached for her glasses, leaning in as the paper crackled beneath her hand. "Federal riparian easement," she murmured. "Stated as active. Filed in '68. That predates any HOA by at least 50 years. And overrides county redraws," I added, "if I can get the records department to confirm it's still on file." She tapped the map thoughtfully. "You realize this isn't just protection. This is a weapon." The word hung between us. Rachel looked up. "Tell me everything." So I did. The forged signature, the fence cutting, Wyatt's confession, the expedited eviction, Maryland's little empire of clipboard tyrants, the developer's name tied to the resort plans. Each detail sharpened her expression until her eyes matched the ice-blue Wyoming sky outside. "When you walked in, I expected we were dealing with a petty HOA power trip," she said quietly. "But this? Elias, this is systematic. It's targeted. And if they forged a boundary survey," she opened her laptop, "they forged more." While she typed, I scanned the hallway. Outside her office, a paralegal was flipping through binders labeled with county names: Albany, Carbon, Laramie, full of the same kinds of disputes Rachel specialized in. Ranchers, landowners, old families with roots deeper than the fence posts hammered into their ground. She clicked her tongue. 3 years of HOA tax filings, all claiming nonprofit status, but paying out consultation fees to developers. Barrow's company, the same one tied to your ranch. I felt a cold ripple run down my spine. "So they're not just bullying me." "No," she said. "They're running a scam, and your land is the biggest prize." She stood abruptly. "We need affidavits, photos, documentation." I took pictures of the cut fence, "So," I said. "And Wyatt, the boy, he admitted what he did." Rachel's expression softened for a moment. "Poor kid. These HOAs thrive on coercing people who don't have the power to say no." "He's scared," I said, "but I think he'll tell the truth if it comes to it." She nodded. "We'll keep him safe." The office door opened, and for a moment the hallway filled with the sound of boots squelching on the entry mat. A dust-covered man stepped inside, hat in hand. He gave Rachel a small nod. "You called?" She motioned him in. "Elias, this is Deputy Clerk Samuel Granger." He offered a handshake. "Heard you've got something that needs digging." I slid the easement map toward him. "Need to confirm whether this is still on official record." He unfolded it carefully. "Haven't seen one of these old federal easements in years." He traced the line of Cottonwood Creek with a weathered finger. "If this holds, the HOA can't touch your land. They'd need federal clearance just to widen a walking path near your waterway." Rachel smiled faintly. "That's what I hoped you'd say." Granger pocketed the map reverently. "Give me a day or two. Could be buried under microfilm or tied to old land patents. Folks forget land has a long memory." He nodded toward me. "And sometimes it remembers who it belongs to." When he left, the room felt lighter somehow. Rachel turned back to me. "While he digs, we start building your case. I want every piece of paper that proves your ownership. Tax receipts, water usage logs, land patents, old letters, anything with a date and your family's name on it." "I've got a metal filing cabinet full," I said. My dad kept records like scripture. Good, she replied. We'll make your case airtight. She reached for another file. Also, the HOA hasn't paid county taxes for 3 years. If that's true, they have no standing to foreclose on anything. The realization hit me like the first gust before a dust storm. If Marilyn forged boundaries, Rachel continued, she forged more than that, I finished. We sat in silence as the implications settled around us. The hum of her office printer filled the quiet. Outside, a truck drove past, tires splashing through leftover rainwater. Finally, Rachel said, Elias, you're not just fighting for your ranch. You may end up exposing the biggest land fraud this county's ever seen. I let out a slow breath. Then let's make sure we don't miss a single loose nail. Her smile grew sharper. We won't. I stood to leave, portfolio tucked under my arm. As I reached the door, Rachel called after me. Elias? I turned. You picked the right moment to fight back. I stepped into the crisp Wyoming air, the scent of wet asphalt mixing with pine. The clouds had broken, revealing bright patches of sky overhead. The storm had passed, but the battle was just beginning. And this time, I wasn't walking into it alone. 2 days later, I found myself pulling into the Cedar Hills Community Park, a manicured stretch of artificial turf and decorative boulders that tried a little too hard to look wild. The HOA was hosting what they called a community safety forum, though every instinct in my body said this was something else. A stage, a setup, a public trial orchestrated before a verdict was already sealed. Rows of folding chairs filled the open grassy field. Professional speakers stood on metal stands, humming with feedback. A projector screen flapped lightly in the wind, its edges snapping against the metal frame. Beside it, a table held stacks of glossy pamphlets printed with my ranch's image, shot from an angle that made it look like a hazardous industrial complex instead of a cattle spread. The title on the pamphlet read, Protecting Property Values, Understanding Agricultural Threats. My jaw clenched. Residents gathered in clusters, murmuring, sipping free coffee from the concession stand. Most wore expensive jackets better suited for ski resorts than Wyoming prairies. They leaned in, whispering to each other whenever they glanced my way. Marilyn stood near the podium in her trademark red coat, organizing a stack of color-coded notes. Her hair was pinned neatly, and her smile, thin, glacial, didn't falter even when she noticed me. Mr. Carter, she called, using that polished tone reserved for condescending school principals. Glad you could attend. Transparency is important when discussing community threats. Good, I replied. Then let's discuss the forged documents you used to steal my ranch. A ripple of uneasy laughter passed through the crowd. Marilyn didn't flinch. As I've explained before, everything has been filed appropriately. If you dispute it, you're welcome to pursue legal review. She leaned in slightly. Though I doubt it will go the way you hope. Her confidence was a sheen, glossy on the surface, brittle underneath. I took my place near the edge of the seating area, arms crossed, watching as the forum began. Marilyn stepped up to the microphone, her voice amplified across the park. Thank you all for coming. Today we'll be addressing significant safety hazards caused by Mr. Carter's ranching activities. A slideshow flickered to life. Slide 1. A cow drinking from Cottonwood Creek, edited with a darkened filter that made the water look murky. Slide 2. A zoomed-in image of scattered hay bales, labeled unregulated waste. Slide 3. A photo of my grandfather's old tractor, taken from an unflattering low angle, making it appear rusted beyond recognition. Soft gasps rose from the gathered residents, many of whom clearly had never stepped foot near actual livestock. Marilyn continued, These images illustrate the environmental degradation happening mere yards from your homes. Contaminated water, hazardous equipment, uncontrolled livestock. Those cattle were only on your land because someone cut my fence, I interrupted loudly. A chorus of murmurs spread across the crowd. Cameras turned toward me. I made sure my voice stayed steady, and I have proof of who did it. Marilyn stiffened. Please refrain from disrupting the presentation. But she moved faster through her slides, as if afraid another interruption might unravel her show. Next, she introduced a man in a crisp gray suit who claimed to be an environmental expert. I recognized him instantly. He'd testified in a property dispute 3 years ago and been discredited for exaggerating contamination levels. He pointed to color-coded charts. Agricultural runoff near residential properties can increase bacterial presence by up to 300%. Only when the data is fabricated, I muttered, not loudly enough for him to respond, but enough to calm the pulse rising in my throat. Residents leaned forward, wide-eyed, hanging on to every exaggerated statistic. Then Marilyn shifted tactics. She invited several neighbors, clearly coached, to share testimony. A woman with pearl earrings took the microphone. My children wake up at 5 every morning because of Mr. Carter's roosters. It's unbearable. Someone else added, property values are dropping. My realtor said buyers refuse to look at homes near the ranch. Another man spoke up, adjusting his designer glasses. I moved here for tranquility, not to live next to that. He gestured toward my land, as if it were a landfill. My nails pressed into my palms. Not from their words, I'd heard similar ignorance many times before, but from the blatant orchestration, the timing, the uniform delivery. Their statements were too rhythmic, too polished. This wasn't a forum, it was a performance. Sheriff Bowe stood near the back, arms crossed. His face betrayed discomfort, as if he knew the whole event was built on sand, but couldn't step in without a warrant or directive. Our eyes met, and he looked away. When the testimonies finished, Marilyn returned to the microphone. In conclusion, the board believes immediate action must be taken to protect our residents. We request that Mr. Carter's agricultural operations be suspended pending investigation. That was the explosion point, the climax of her little circus. I stepped forward, and suddenly, the crowd quieted. I didn't shout, didn't need to. My voice carried on its own weight. I've listened patiently to accusations built on exaggerations, lies, and a slideshow of edited photos. You all deserve to know the truth, not the fiction someone fed you to justify stealing my land. I paused, letting my gaze sweep the rows of uneasy faces. Your fence wasn't damaged by cattle. It was cut, with bolt cutters. I have photographs of the cuts and the tracks, and I have a witness, a boy pressured by your HOA president, who admitted to doing it. Gasps rippled through the group. Marilyn stepped back, face blanching for a split second before she recovered. Baseless accusations. Not baseless, I said. Documented. I held up my phone, and every minute of that confession was recorded. A hush fell over the entire forum, heavier than any storm cloud. Marilyn's jaw tightened. Her knuckles whitened around her clipboard. The confident sheen she'd worn earlier began to crack. I saw it, the first real flicker of panic. I took a step back, letting the silence settle. They thought I was beaten. They thought this show would bury me. But silence, I'd learned, wasn't surrender. It was just the inhale before the strike, and I was only getting started. The morning after the HOA's circus, the air over my ranch felt sharper, colder, as if Wyoming itself was bracing for what came next. Cottonwood leaves rattled in the breeze, their silver undersides flashing like warnings. The cattle moved nervously across the pasture, hooves thudding against half-dry earth. Even they sensed something was shifting. By 9 o'clock, my kitchen table had become a war room. Rachel sat across from me, sleeves rolled to her elbows, laptop open and surrounded by stacks of documents. HOA bylaws, county tax audits, Foreclosure notices. The glow from her screen flickered across her determined expression as she highlighted line after line in digital yellow. "You weren't exaggerating," she said at last, exhaling slowly. "This isn't just negligence. This is deliberate fraud." I poured her a second cup of coffee, the steam curling upward like a phantom. "You find the proof?" She turned the laptop so I could see the spreadsheet. 3 properties foreclosed in the last 2 years, all snapped up by relatives of HOA board members, purchased at auction for laughably low amounts, then transferred to shell companies tied to, she clicked again, Clint Barrow. My stomach tightened. The same developer who wants to turn my land into a golf resort. "Exactly," she said. "And here's the kicker. The foreclosure judge who signed off on those sales, he received over $15,000 in campaign donations from Barrow's development PAC." I let out a long breath, cold and heavy. Corruption that deep didn't just happen. It grew, layer by layer, like mold in dark corners no one bothered to inspect. Rachel continued, "And remember that forged boundary survey? I checked the federal land registry. The real survey on record doesn't include your ranch in the HOA's jurisdiction. Not even close." "So Maryland didn't just stretch the lines," I said. "She rewrote the map." "She rewrote the law," Rachel corrected. "Or she tried to." She pushed another folder toward me. "And this is the part that really seals it." Inside was a printed email thread, screenshots pulled directly from a server access log. "Where did you get these?" I asked. Rachel smirked slightly. "A friendly whistleblower at the county clerk's office. Someone who doesn't appreciate being ordered to file midnight documents without oversight." I scanned the emails, heartbeat quickening with each line. From M. Croft at Cedar Hill HOA to C. Barrow at Vista Dev boundary amendment filed. Klein's signature added. Proceed with acquisition plan. Another message. Transfer of 14-acre parcel approved once Carter property secured. Resort blueprint finalized pending board vote. Everything I suspected, spelled out in black text. "They weren't even subtle," I murmured. Rachel leaned back. "People get sloppy when they think they're untouchable." I flipped to the next page and my breath caught. A scanned check made out to the HOA treasurer's husband for consultation fees. $40,000. The memo line read simply, Phase 2 clearance. "Phase 2, I repeated. Rachel nodded. "Your ranch." A cold, focused anger settled over me, not the wild fury from before, but the kind that sharpened my thoughts like a whetstone. "This is racketeering," she said plainly. "Interstate fraud, bribery, forged federal documents. This isn't just a lawsuit. This is federal prison material." Before I could answer, a soft knock sounded at the door. I opened it to find Wyatt Bloom standing on the porch again, shoulders hunched against the wind. He looked smaller than last time, as if fear had carved away at him. "Wyatt," I said gently, "come on in." He stepped inside, eyes darting nervously toward the stacks of paperwork. "Mr. Carter, I thought you should know something." Rachel looked up. "Hi, Wyatt. You're safe here." He swallowed hard. "My mom got a letter from Miss Croft. It says if we don't maintain association loyalty, we'll be evicted from our rental." My chest tightened. "She's threatening your family?" He nodded. "She said I talked to people I shouldn't have, that I'm putting the community at risk." Rachel's face darkened. "That's witness intimidation." Wyatt blinked. There's more." He pulled a folded sheet from his pocket. It was a map, clean, glossy, with colored zones marking various parcels. "I found this in Ms. Croft's office when I was dropping off flyers," he said. "She wasn't there, and the drawer was open." The heading read, Cedar Hills Expansion Phase 3, Agricultural Acquisitions. My ranch was circled in bold red ink. So were two others, families who'd ranched there for generations. Rachel unfolded the map fully, her expression tightening with each square she reviewed. She planned to take the entire valley. Why? I asked. Because Barrow can sell a luxury resort for $40 million, she said. But only if he clears out every rancher in sight. The weight of that number hung between us. 40 million reasons to forge documents. 40 million reasons to coerce neighbors. 40 million reasons to sabotage fences, lie in meetings, smear reputations. 40 million reasons to erase me. Wyatt spoke again, voice trembling. Mr. Carter, I'm sorry. I didn't know it was this bad. I rested a hand on his shoulder. You didn't put us here, son, but you're helping us get out. He nodded shakily. Rachel straightened. Elias, with this map, the emails, the financial ties, this is no longer a civil matter. This is criminal conspiracy. A gust of wind rattled the window, sending a thin whistle through the cracks. Outside, clouds churned over the prairie like a warning. What happens now? Wyatt whispered. I looked at him, then at Rachel, then at the piles of evidence spread across the table. Now, I said, voice steady, we show them what happens when you think you can steal from a Carter. Rachel gathered the documents. We'll file racketeering complaints with the state attorney general, and when the time comes, we'll take it all to court. It wasn't just a fight anymore. It was a reckoning, and the cracks in their empire were finally showing. By the time dusk rolled across the Wyoming plains, the sky burned with streaks of copper and violet. A cold wind carried dust down from the ridgelines, brushing dry sage against the wooden fence posts like whispers from old ghosts. I stood on my porch, arms crossed, watching the land darken 1 acre at a time. The ranch looked steady, ancient, older than the HOA's arrogance, older than any forged map. It reminded me why the fight mattered. Inside, the house felt strangely still. Wyatt had gone home hours ago with a plate of leftover stew, and Rachel's reassurance ringing in his ears. Rachel herself was driving back to Cheyenne, her truck loaded with evidence files. She promised to return by morning. Meanwhile, Deputy Clerk Granger was combing through county archives, searching for the official easement record to match the map we'd found in my barn. All I could do now was wait. Waiting. That was the hardest part of any fight. The storm shutters rattled softly as the wind picked up. I opened the door and stepped back inside, the familiar creak of the old floorboards greeting me like an old friend. The house smelled faintly of pine resin from the logs I'd split earlier, mingled with the scent of aging paper, my father's filing cabinet sitting open beside the kitchen table. I pulled out the next stack of deeds and tax receipts. Years of documentation, decades really, yellowed edges curling slightly. Every one of them held a story, a moment in time when a Carter signed his name to keep the ranch moving forward. Now they formed the backbone of the legal wall I planned to build. My father used to say, "The land remembers the hands that honor it." Tonight, I felt those words more deeply than ever. I found myself drifting to the barn again, lantern in hand. The door swung open with a soft groan, letting out the earthy smell of hay, leather tack, and dust. The lantern threw warm flickers across the rafters, across old tools arranged in perfect lines, tools my father sharpened, tools my grandfather carried across this same dirt long before I was born. At the back of the barn was the workbench, and above it, hanging crooked but proud, was the framed black and white photo of my grandfather the day he bought the ranch, lean, sunburned, stubborn as the desert, standing with Cottonwood Creek curling behind him. I studied the photo for a long time, letting the silence settle over me. It wasn't a heavy silence, not like defeat, more like the hush in a courtroom before a verdict is read, or the breath before a rider gives the horse the signal to charge. On the table beside the lantern lay the paperwork Rachel had prepared earlier. The articles for the Cottonwood Conservation District. A single sheet, typed neatly. One signature line at the bottom. Mine. If approved, the district would gain immediate authority over environmental protection zones, including the riparian corridor that wound right through my ranch. It would give me legal standing. It would give me leverage. And under Wyoming law, conservation districts had the ability to exercise eminent domain to protect land from improper development. Meaning, if the HOA illegally absorbed my land into their jurisdiction, I now had the power, if approved, to reclaim every acre their forged boundary touched, even land they thought they owned, even homes, even the entire Cedar Hills subdivision. That was why Rachel had smiled so sharply when she handed me the form. "Elias," she had said, "if they wanted to play with fire, let's see how they like the flames." I exhaled slowly, took a pen from the bench, and signed my name. Outside, the wind howled once, sweeping dust across the yard. A few raindrops clinked against the barn roof. Light, scattered, the remnants of a storm that couldn't quite let go. I placed the signed documents into a sealed envelope. Tomorrow morning, they would be filed with the county and state, and the moment approval went through, the power dynamics would shift like a mountain sliding. The HOA had built their entire scheme on stolen maps and false signatures. I was about to counter with federal easements and state-backed conservation law. "Paperwork is power," Clint Barrow had told me. He wasn't wrong, but he'd forgotten something crucial. Honest paperwork is stronger. As I stepped out of the barn, lantern raised to light the path back to the house, my boots crunched through the shallow puddles left by the afternoon storm. The air felt electric, as if the very land sensed what was coming. Tonight was calm, but beneath the calm ran tension, like the tight pull of a rope stretched between two forces waiting for one to break. I reached the porch, wiped the mud from my boots, and set the lantern by the door. Before going inside, I turned once more toward the valley. Quiet, vast, steady. Lights twinkled faintly from Cedar Hills in the distance, little artificial stars clinging to the hillsides. Tomorrow, those lights would flicker for a different reason, because tomorrow, the land would speak for itself. And for the first time since this fight began, it would speak in my favor. The next morning broke crisp and pale, the sky washed in a winter blue haze that seemed to stretch forever. A thin frost covered the pasture grass, each blade catching the sunlight like shards of broken glass. The cattle moved quietly, sensing the heavy air, as if nature itself were holding its breath. Even the wind, usually restless across the plains, moved with a slow, deliberate rhythm. I stood beside my truck, envelope in hand, the signed Conservation District paperwork burning like a live ember in my palm. Today wasn't a day for guesswork or hesitation. Today was the day everything aligned. Easement maps, affidavits, forged signatures, the clerk's findings, Wyatt's truth, Rachel's meticulous research. And of all places for fate to converge, it chose the county courthouse. By the time I pulled into town, the square was already buzzing. News vans lined the curb. Camera crews set up tripods. Residents from Cedar Hills milled around the courthouse steps, whispering like churchgoers before a scandalous sermon. Some held signs, "Protect our community," "Stop agricultural recklessness," "Save Cedar Hills," "Manufactured outrage," "Maryland's handiwork." I killed the engine, took a grounding breath, and stepped out into the cold. Footsteps echoed behind me, steady, confident. Rachel joined my side, her briefcase heavy with evidence. She wore a dark coat, hair pinned back, eyes sharpened by conviction. "You ready?" she asked. "As ready as a Carter needs to be," I said. Inside, the courthouse lobby bustled with voices bouncing beneath the tall ceilings. The smell of wood polish and old paper filled the air, familiar and oddly comforting. Sheriff Bowe stood near the entrance to the courtroom, hat held respectfully in one hand. He nodded when he saw me, the lines around his eyes deeper than usual. "Morning, Elias," he said quietly. "Heard it's a full house today." "Your HOA president made sure of that," I replied. He sighed. "I saw some of their complaints. Never sat right with me. But today, well, let's just say I'm keeping an open mind." It wasn't an apology, but it was close enough for now. We entered the courtroom. It was packed, residents squeezed into pew-like benches, reporters lined along the back wall, and Marilyn Croft sitting proudly at the plaintiff's table with Clint Barrow beside her. She wore another tailored coat, white this time, pristine as bleached bone, and her expression was nothing short of triumphant. For someone about to be blindsided, she looked awfully comfortable. The judge entered, rapping his gavel sharply. "We are here for the emergency injunction hearing requested by Cedar Hills Homeowners Association against Mr. Elias Carter." Marilyn stood instantly. "Your Honor, the HOA seeks immediate cessation of all agricultural activity on the Cedar Hills border. Mr. Carter's actions pose environmental, safety, and economic threats." Rachel rose. "Your Honor, before any allegations proceed, the defense has preliminary evidence that directly undermines the HOA's claim of jurisdiction." Marilyn shot her a glare sharp enough to cut wire. The judge motioned. "Proceed." Rachel handed him a binder. "Your Honor, Exhibit A, the so-called boundary realignment document submitted by Cedar Hills last year. The surveyor's signature belongs to Richard Klein, a man deceased 10 months prior. We have his death certificate." A wave of murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Marilyn's lips thinned. The judge flipped pages, eyebrows narrowing. "Is this accurate?" "It is," Rachel said, "and that forged signature was used to justify annexing Mr. Carter's ranch into HOA jurisdiction." "Impossible," Marilyn snapped. "Our legal team verified." Rachel didn't let her finish. "We have the emails, Your Honor. Direct communication between Ms. Croft and Mr. Barrow coordinating falsified filings and foreclosures." She opened another binder, Exhibit B. Clint shifted uncomfortably. The judge's eyes darkened. "Ms. Croft, do you care to explain?" Marilyn straightened, but her voice wavered faintly. "These are taken out of context. Fabricated, no doubt. Mr. Carter has clearly hacked." Rachel slid a flash drive forward. "These were retrieved by the county IT department under subpoena request. Time-stamped, verified, not altered." If silence had weight, the room was sinking under it. "And there's more," Rachel continued, her voice steady as bedrock. "Exhibit C, tax records indicating Cedar Hills HOA has not paid mandatory county property taxes in 3 years. An HOA delinquent in taxes has no authority to foreclose on any property." The judge's jaw set tightly. Before Marilyn could spin another lie, I stood. "Your Honor," I said, voice steady. "Exhibit D." I handed the clerk a sealed envelope. Inside lay the map, my father's map, the federal riparian easement from 1968. "This document places Cottonwood Creek under federal protection," I said, "meaning any land touching it cannot be seized, repurposed, or developed without federal approval. Cedar Hills never had authority over it. Not then. Not now." A collective gasp filled the room. Clint's face drained of color. Judge Henley scanned the document, his expression shifting from curiosity to stunned realization. "This overrides local jurisdiction." "It does," I said, "and it invalidates every action taken against my ranch." Rachel stepped forward again. "Additionally, Your Honor, Exhibit E." She motioned to the bailiff. Wyatt entered the courtroom. The boy walked with small, hesitant steps, but his resolve was visible in his clenched fists. His mother trailed behind him, eyes damp but proud. Wyatt cleared his throat. Ms. Croft paid me to cut Mr. Carter's fences. She said it would help the HOA build a case. I recorded her telling me what to do." He handed the judge a USB drive. Marilyn shot to her feet. "Lies! This is harassment! He's a child! He doesn't understand!" "He understands perfectly," Rachel said coolly. The judge rapped his gavel. "Enough." Silence fell once more. "At this time," Judge Henley declared, voice firm, "the court acknowledges substantial evidence of fraud, forgery, and deliberate harassment perpetrated by the Cedar Hills HOA." I stepped forward, not with anger, but with the quiet certainty that paper carried more power than any threat. "Your Honor," I said, "on behalf of the newly formed Cottonwood Conservation District, effective as of this morning, I am invoking eminent domain authority to reclaim all properties illegally annexed through forged documents." Gasps erupted. Someone dropped a phone. Marilyn stumbled back as if struck by a physical blow. I continued, "That includes the entirety of Cedar Hills Estates. Under state law, agricultural use valuation places each half-acre parcel at approximately $800. The judge nodded slowly, absorbing it. Marilyn's voice cracked as she lunged forward. "You can't take our homes!" "I'm not taking anything," I said calmly. "I'm restoring what you stole and protecting the land your HOA tried to erase." The judge banged his gavel. "Given the evidence, federal agents will be notified immediately. This hearing is adjourned." As reporters surged forward and residents erupted into chaos, Sheriff Bowe moved swiftly to restrain Marilyn. Clint tried to slip out the side door, but two deputies cut him off. Rachel touched my arm lightly. "It's done, Elias." I looked toward the courthouse doors, sunlight spilling across the floor. Justice didn't roar today. It didn't need to. It walked out steady, wearing boots, and it walked out with me. When the courthouse doors swung shut behind us, a cold Wyoming wind swept through the square, carrying with it the scent of juniper and dust. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed like lightning across the pavement. But all of that noise felt distant, muted somehow, because for the first time in weeks, the weight on my chest had shifted. Not gone, but lighter, manageable. Across the square, deputies guided Marilyn Croft into a waiting patrol car, her white coat flapping in the wind like a surrender flag. The ironclad confidence she'd worn for months had finally cracked. Her eyes were wild, darting between the cameras and the courthouse as though begging someone to rewrite the verdict. Beside her, Clint Barrow stood rigid in handcuffs, jaw clenched, his expensive shoes splattered with courthouse mud. For a man who tried to buy a valley, he suddenly looked very small. Sheriff Bowe approached me, hat tucked under his arm. "Well, Elias, never thought I'd see the day." He shook his head. "That was one hell of a case." "Not a case," I said quietly. "A reckoning." He let out a breath. "Reckoning or not, just know you were right. And I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." I nodded, letting the apology settle. All that matters now is putting things right. Behind me, Rachel stepped up, her briefcase heavy with the documents that had just rewritten the future of an entire subdivision. The breeze tugged at the ends of her hair as she looked toward the Cedar Hills Ridge. "They'll fight it, you know," she said. "Some will claim hardship. Some will claim ignorance." "Ignorance doesn't erase fraud," I replied. Still, she offered a faint smile. "It does soften the landing." And she was right. Losing a home, no matter how unlawfully gained, was a hard thing to swallow. Even if the homeowners never knew the land beneath them was stolen in the first place. But what the HOA had done couldn't go unanswered. By the following week, the paperwork finalized. Cedar Hills Estates, every house, lot, greenbelt, and access road, was officially under the authority of the Cottonwood Conservation District. Appraised at agricultural use value, each parcel came to only $800. It was the law, not a loophole, not a trick. Just justice wearing the same legal armor the HOA once used against everyone else. The residents gathered in the community center, the same place where Marilyn once held her smug meetings. But now the mood was different. Uneasy. Quiet. The walls still smelled faintly of carpet cleaner and fresh paint, but the air carried something heavier. I stepped onto the stage, Rachel beside me. "Folks," I began, voice calm, "I know this is a shock. I know many of you bought homes here believing everything was legitimate, but your HOA leadership forged documents, manipulated county records, and stole land, not just from me, but from the valley." Whispers spread across the room. A man in a fleece jacket raised a shaky hand. "Are we homeless? Because of something they did?" "No," I said. "You're not." Relief washed over faces like a warm wind. Rachel stepped forward. "The district now owns the land, yes, but you will not be evicted. We're converting the entire subdivision into protected conservation territory. Anyone who wishes to lease their home long-term at agricultural land rates may do so. Your monthly payment will be less than a typical electric bill." A woman in the front row burst into tears. The good kind. Another resident asked, "So, you're not going to bulldoze everything?" "No," I said. "I'm a rancher, not a tyrant." A ripple of laughter moved through the room, fragile but genuine. I continued, "You'll be part of a conservation community. The greenbelts will become wildlife corridors again. The creek will be restored, and your homes, those that stay, will be placed under stewardship rules, not HOA rules." Someone clapped softly. Then someone else, and soon the room filled with applause. Uneven, surprised, but real. Outside the community center, the land looked different already. Not physically, no bulldozers, no torn fences, just a sense of return, a shift in the way the earth breathed. Days later, I walked the new conservation zone with Wyatt. The boy kicked dust as he went, the brim of his borrowed ranch hat shadowing his eyes. "You think people will be okay with this?" he asked. "I think folks are tougher than they look," I said, "especially when the truth is finally on the table." Wyatt nodded, eyeing the horizon. "And Miss Croft?" "She'll face the law," I said simply. "Fraud has a long memory." He seemed to like that answer. We reached the top of a small rise overlooking my ranch. Cottonwood Creek shimmered in the sunlight, its waters bright and unburdened. The air carried the scent of wet stone and new grass. The place felt peaceful, like the land itself was healing. Rachel met us there, a stack of papers in her arms. "You've done something big, Elias," she said. "People will talk about this case for years." "I didn't do it alone." "Maybe not," she said with a smile. "But you were the spark." That night, I stood on my porch watching the sunset pour across the valley like molten amber. The ranch stretched out before me, steady as ever, unchanged by all the chaos swirling around it. But I had changed. I'd learned that justice doesn't always come with fanfare. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in signatures, in evidence, in the steady work of those who refuse to let corruption win. And sometimes it comes wearing boots. As the first stars flickered awake above the plains, I felt something I hadn't felt since before this war began. Peace. They tried to steal my legacy. Instead, they handed me the power to protect everyone else's. And the land, faithful as ever, echoed that justice across the Wyoming wind. If you've ever stood your ground against folks who thought they could push you around, drop a simple yes in the comments so I know you're out there. And if stories about justice, land, and dignity mean something to you, go on and hit subscribe. There's plenty more truth to tell out here.